Caroline Chan. I work in Intel. I've been in Intel for the last 11 years. It's been a long time. So I'm part of the Intel Network Platform Group. So many of you might not realize that Intel is actually in the network business for many years. And our division generates about $6 billion of revenue. So it's compared to Intel, it's not the predominant force of revenue, but it's the fastest growing division inside of Intel. And also we're under the data platforms group. What that translates into is that we're able to leverage the cloud platforms, the AI, IoT division, that we have a very large IoT division. We also have connectivity group. We also, FPGA. So all of that assets, it's under the same umbrella, under the same general manager that we're able to share a lot of the IPs around, as well as engineering resources. And we actually did share, I think in the last quarter earnings with the street, that in 5G, Intel platform powers over 40% of the 5G RAN platform that's out there deploying. We also are the majority, if not all, of the 5G core network have Intel silicon platforms in there. So that's actually a very phenomenal achievement, if I may humbly say that. So Intel architecture are in many of the 5G platforms. So the way that we looked at 5G is slightly different than maybe others would think of 5G. We don't think of them as a connectivity. We really think of 5G as a transformational force for digitalization of not just the telco industry, but also the enterprise. So that it really shifts how we approach our product line. Instead of chasing to do a purposely driven product, like ASIC, we prefer to take the cloud offering, but add the right accelerator, hardware accelerator, add the right IP, and also we put a lot of persistent memory in there, the FPGA portion, to make 5G not just as serve the connectivity purpose, but also serves AI, machine learning on the edge, and really drives the cloudification of the network. And that has been driving our thinking. It drives our product roadmap. We see this more as a compute paradigm, rather a data-centric world, rather than a connectivity-only industry. I couldn't say that more than enough. I recognize some of you being in this industry for a long time, and I have too, and I used to work in Nortel. We always, when we were doing a 3G and then even at 4G, we always think of it as a connectivity, right? Chasing the Shannon's law. How power is still important, cost is still important, but now automation becomes important, memory becomes very important. Think of all the workloads that need to be run on the edge becomes important. How that make that automated such that enterprise can deploy becomes very important. So that's key thing. So if you in the future, you and us have a conversation about how we can work together, please keep in mind that we really think of 5G as a compute rather than as a connectivity only platform. So next page, please, Rita. Then we've been talking about network transformation a lot. So we've been on the forefront of NFV and software-defined network, working with many of you, like Durga, in his previous role in Sprint. We work with a lot of people. So we really trying to drive from the legacy, which is a closed, proprietary, custom hardware defined network, to more of a software-defined network. O-RAN is one example, right? Taking this open interface to the most reluctant to change part of the network, which is the radio. we started looking at that at LTE phase. We developed something called a FlexRAN, which is a server-based radio access network. Now it's powering the 5G network, that the cloud-native 5G network was out there. Dish announced, Intel. We work with Rakuten. We work with, even, like, if you think of the granddaddy of them all, Verizon. They're launching a 5G, a virtualized 5G based on Intel. So the point is that we believe that the journey we have started is coming into a stage that you could see that it does work. So I really think of the timing for this 5G open innovation is absolutely the right timing. Let's just say if the operator puts in this kind of network, what can we innovate on top of it? What can we drive the ROI? When I say we, meaning you, with support from Intel. You are really the force that's driving the different applications and services to make 5G ROI a reality. And I just read that we already just started 6G work. Somebody says 2028, 2029, but I just say in 2030, in that era, what the 6G will bring on top of 5G. So really, we're looking at some of the open interface, open RAN driven, cloud driven, but really started using from a data-driven to a service-centric network. What does that mean? I don't know what that entails, but I can tell you that will absolutely driving on a cloud-like network rather than a hardware-defined network. That I have confidence of, and I whether we will still be in the industry at that time, 2030, I don't know, but hopefully we pave the road for that. The intelligence is everywhere where you need it, flexibility, and so on. So let's go to the next page. So then I wanted to, so this, forgive me, I think many of you know this, but in case you didn't come from the telco, I just want to point out a few things, right? The telco is still very much a 3GPP protocols driven. The timing of it drives the network rollout. But if you look at, if I look at release 15, that's still very much like what we have in LTE. It's a EMBB driven. It's a consumer. How much data can you pump in? My capacity, my throughput is higher than your throughput type of discussion. But as release 16 URLC, and release 17, which is coming out, hopefully sometimes in 2022, you start seeing the shifting away from the smartphone, the PC, CPE to V2X, to precision agriculture, to smart manufacturing, to recently I just saw this new terminology comes out, so 5G.MIL. MIL stands for military. 5G now powers Air Force and Army. No longer it's just the people. How do we think about the applications and the requirements and the latency, the jitter, the capacity? Is the capacity still downloading a movie at the record time in seconds? Is that still the benchmark of the network? I don't know. I mean, some of the things will not change. We still have to talk about cell edge throughput, cell edge capacity. But I would think SLA becomes way more important, right? If you're going to go into a hospital, that would be probably trumps Shannon's law, probably trumps power and cost to a certain degree. I was going to share one example. It was that before the pandemic, we were invited to participate to link up schools, remote education in China with 5G and edge. At that time, it was more of a goodwill. We never thought that was gonna go. Like, who needs that? Kids are going to school physically. We're doing it because there wasn't enough native speakers in China to teach English, especially for remote areas. So we were, taking the best teachers in Shanghai and gave them and move that to the more rural areas. I would say the pilot was maybe 3 months in. We really weren't ready, and then you know what happened last year, right? When January hit and everything went into lockdown, all of a sudden that becomes essential. Like from goodwill to you must have this. Now we're bringing that back into the United States. Now everybody said this is here to stay. Some type of hybrid is here to stay. I also remember the conversation we had at the hospitals. I was up in Buffalo talking to one of the premier surgeons he has the best rate. If you ever have some kind of stroke, he has the best record to get you back to normal. We were talking with him about how to get his surgery broadcasted and taught more students. And then somehow pandemic hits, that becomes essential. Not remote surgery per se, but how to be able to monitor and supervise some of the surgeries happen when he could not be there physically in the surgery room. All the things we thought that we don't need, nice to have, becomes essential. So my point is that the work that we're doing here is not just for foo-foos. It's not just for innovation for the sake of it. There is a demand, and the fundamental of the network change such that you could do that in this network. That's really what I'm trying to share with you. That's my belief, and that's where we put our money where our mouth is. So next page. So this is a little bit of an Intel commercial, right? If you look at the 5G, it really goes all the way from the device, IoT, all the way to the cloud. We do offer the portfolio to spanning all of that, anywhere from the low end Atom to the higher end Xeon and more importantly, people don't realize that we actually have a lot of software. OpenVINO is one of them. We have Smart Edge or openness. We have FlexRAN. We provide reference designs, open source ones for the core network as well. So Intel, from top to bottom, what distinguishes us from another silicon provider, I like to think, is the fact that we have a very strong ecosystem. Building ecosystem is at the DNA of Intel. We don't just release a silicon, we release silicon with an ecosystem around them. So people knows how to program. There are folks like you that they can go in and provide location services and whatnot that people can actually roll out in the network. So now that I've been here for over 10 years, and I realized really Intel does not compete on silicon alone. We really compete on ecosystem. Just the best silicon without anyone to develop on top of it, it's nothing. It's just a piece of sand that's in a form of wafer. So next page, please. We have two examples how we work with you. And I think Sean hopefully is online, and if you have any questions, you can ask and we can discuss. So we talked about how Intel measures ROI. We very much, and Jim knows this, we wanted to take your technology into our portfolio. We wanted to build you as part of our ecosystem. Transparent Path is an example from a previous cohort that we are working with them to take a blockchain to privacy preservation, logistics, to take food all the way to the consumer space, right? We have a platform called the Intel Connected Logistics Platform, which is a sensors platform. So right now, we have a test bed with the T-Mobile, using T-Mobile's 5G. We're moving them into the edge compute piece. There's a test bed for our use, leveraging the Intel Connected Logistics Platform, and then eventually we go into a commercial pilot. So that kind of outlines typically how we work with you. We typically have a partner to providing our typically one of our OEM, ODM comes in and powers it, but we provide the actual technology platform itself, maybe even some of the software. We do have engineers that can work with you to help you bring your technology to fruition. And we want you to adopt Intel from the get-go. We want you, as you're thinking through how you go to market with us. So that's how we get measured of ROI. I think we have one more example on transportation. There's a company called Quaychain. It's also that gone through the cohort. We see logistics transportation as a very large market. There's about 500,000 parking lots targeting for interstate trucking alone and warehouses just in this country. So we work with Quaychain. I think we might even be the one that brought them into the cohort, because I met the Quaychain founders in a conference. We're very bullish on a private 5G network. This is probably the hype that people have been talking about. So we build a network just for a enterprise. So providing the high reliability, you don't tune the network for consumer, you tune the network for a particular use cases, low latency, on-prem. On-prem, it's probably where a lot of the money is going into. So it's a picture that kind of a high level showing you that we currently do have a line of sight to run a commercial pilot with funding from the state government in the port situation. Actually, recently we've been having conversation with Europeans, and there's a lot of ports being revitalized. I think Singapore's rebuilding their port. So there is a lot of smart porting, smart transportation, smart ports being rolled out in the market. So I highly encourage us, as we think through what is your application best used for the leveraging the 5G, think about the different verticals that's out there. Industrial, definitely one. Retail, even with the pandemic, we still see a need. Venues, a little bit. We don't know when that's going to come back, but people are working on it. Transportation is one that is coming up. Military, DOD is putting a lot of money into this. Agriculture, some of the rural funding, precision agriculture funding, the food resiliency program that we launched, that Jim launched, has been very, very successful. We get a lot of very interesting conversation out of that. So I think I probably have one more page, right, Shrita? Then we should open up for.
No, I think this is the last one. I think.
This is the last time. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just what you guys think? Well, let's just have a two-way, multi-way conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. And to start that, I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the first, it's really a two-part question. I split them up initially, but as you were just chatting now about private enterprise networking, I thought I'd ask the two together. And that is, it is widely anticipated that private enterprise networking will have a fairly large demand on spectrum today. In some cases, some analysts are suggesting that demand could be bigger than consumer demand on spectrum. How important is O-RAN, not just to the 5G journey in a public network like a T-Mobile or others, how important is O-RAN to the enterprise private networking world, in your opinion?
I think ultimately it's going to drive a lot of the demand. Like, we currently in something called NextG Alliance. Without breaking the NDA, a lot of the next generation 6G is building on the O-RAN principle. The O-RAN principle, really, to boil down, it just means you desegregate the hardware from the software. That's all it means. When it's hard for you to innovate when that's a complete black box to you. Like you have, like, people write applications for AWS, Microsoft, because it's this SDK, there's open interface you can plug, and the traditional way that we've been doing this for 3G and 4G, you can't do any of that. So you're writing this thing as a blind person. So far everything 6G is talking about it demands ORAN. And enterprise is what gonna drive 6G. Every conversation we've had on private enterprise really driving on application development. And there's no, I mean, I could see some connectivity only play, but most of the enterprise, after they get connectivity, they want to do other things. Like we even have a conversation here inside Intel with our CIOs. We have a case standing up in our factories in Penang. The factory manager, like, oh yeah, great, just so that my guys have better connectivity. That's not it at all, right? He wants ROI. It's going to cost him money. It's going to cost him CapEx, and not to mention he had to train his people to maintain this new 5G. No, he wants some payback. He wants payback in terms of defects detection. He wants payback in terms of safety. We do have, accidents happening on our factory floor. He wants all of that happening. And then you telling him that this is something that needs an RF engineer to maintain? Heck, no, that ain't gonna happen. It's just gonna be such a hard sell. Like Durga knows, you know what I'm talking about. How many RF engineers at each university graduate? And that's just, you're never gonna get beyond a Sprint and a Verizon and T-Mobile if you just stick to that principle. No.
Yeah. Okay. I have a follow-on question, but Peter from MantisNet raised his hand, so I'll defer to him for his question, and then I'll come back. Peter, did you want to go next?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Carolyn. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. So we at MantisNet, we're all about delivering observability at the edge, for purposes of ensuring the security, performance, and reliability of 5G infrastructure. I think we were joking at the intake sessions that there's an old joke in the VC community that telecommunications is where startup companies go to die. So if there was ever an industry vertical that would crush a startup, it was telecommunications. But that said, I mean, we believe that cloud native and 5G and 6G and beyond, it's now a software play. And Jim mentioned that at the session the other day. And that the large service providers have to embrace that or die. So that said, I mean, it's really exciting, but it also, it makes it really challenging for companies such as ourselves to really get engaged far enough back in the supply chain. And that's Intel, that's Microsoft, that's some core components and technology providers. So again, that said, what's the best way? Obviously, we're here because you all thought we were good enough to be selected for this, but what's the best way to get plugged into Intel, specifically to discuss in more depth the value of what we're doing, and then how we can engage with you and your partners. And I appreciate the point you made that it's all about the OEMs and ODMs to really get into test beds, whether it's within the broader T-Mobile or some of these next generation carriers. How can we use this opportunity with the 5G Open Innovation Lab to really take advantage of these contacts and get into the supply chain to show what we can do and prove our value?
Before you answer that, Caroline, and if I can put a slightly different spin on it, which keeps to Peter's intent, this industry, I would argue similarly to the early days of the cloud industry, was dominated by a set of vendors. And so if you're working on innovation that is different than what someone like a T-Mobile or whomever is accustomed to using, it's usually hard to break through that noise, right? And when you're operating networks at the scale that T-Mobile does, they're very reluctant, rightly so, to deploy something that it's an unknown thing. Despite the fact that it's great technology, they're just reluctant to do so. So I think of Peter's question as, how do you break through that noise, right? Because if we all agree this is going software long term, and some of those incumbents are going in that direction, there's a lot of new innovation that is happening out in the fringes, most of which will probably not go anywhere, but some of which will be transformative. How do those break through?
Yeah, I think this is a conversation. I can share my thoughts, and Jim, I know for sure you have your thoughts, and then I'll invite Sean, who is my primary rep on this, also share his, because the two example that I show you it's probably a really good way of a recipe how we can work with you. And I would like that to be improved also, because I do have a certain metrics I can measure by how many of you that I work with on every cohort, just so you know. So my skin is on the game. It's in the game too. I'm not just sitting here go, oh, I'm just here to talk to you at the beginning and at the end. No, I get measured by how many of your technology I am consuming as out of this, because Intel doesn't give money without extracting $1 flash.
Sure.
Shoot, you're recording this. I probably should say that. but ultimately, everything's ROI, right? So I looked at. I totally, by the way, Peter, I agree with you. It used to be really hard unless if your name is not Ericsson, Nokia, or Dell, or HP, it's really hard to break into this very a circle, right? But because something like this, because what Jim's and his folks teams are doing, you are being exposed, and we have now exposed to you. Meaning John Saw, myself, the Microsoft team, the Dell team, the VMware team, the MDOS team. We have a first look. We hope. I mean, I'm thinking we have the first pick at this. The cases that like Quaychain and Transparent Path, it's essentially you just cut through. I don't know how many layers. You now will directly engage with T-Mobile. You're now using the latest Intel technology. What I'm showing there, phase 3, we haven't released it, right? It's something that's coming out. In fact, when I saw the slides, I didn't even know what it was. I had to call my team and say, what is this? You just got the latest technology that Intel has. If we've proven this out, and you have the name Intel and T-Mobile behind you, and I would like to think that it means something when you go to the next stage of fundraising, you go to a commercial pilot. Through this, you ask the question of how you cut through. I'm also looking at this question, how I cut through, because Intel platform will not get the premium that we believe we deserve if we don't deliver the value. Let's just say this: if I sell if I sell my platform through, let's say, Cisco or Nokia to T-Mobile at X dollars, the monetization piece is what the X plus will come in if they wind up deploying a very profitable military application that they can sell to additional market share. That's how T-Mobile justify their investment, or Nokia justify their investment, and that's how I go back and justify I need more R&D dollars. It's that circle. Don't think of me helping you. Think about you helping me as well, right? That's Peter. Hopefully, I mean, does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. And again, I guess by virtue of being here, you all have taken interest in our technology, and so we have the door is open. I think if I heard you correctly, it's a matter of now, over the course of next weeks and months, putting together a plan to engage with Intel and the other partners.
Yeah, in fact, Sean is online, Sean Underwood, and he will be. He's the one probably interact with you way more than I do, and he does come out and he makes recommendations. Every one of these engagements we have, Sean and Bhupesh, and they made the recommendation. They said this is what they also pulling the relevant Intel technology. It's not just a network, by the way. What I was sharing with you was actually from our IoT group, our vertical group.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, this is Sean, I would just add that keep in mind, I mean, just at Intel, there's 120,000 employees, right? And so there's a lot of noise even for us to break through to our own salespeople. And nothing works better than an example of success. Caroline showed you the Quaychain and Transparent Path examples, and if you've got a customer that by involving some of us, you can take a pilot to the next step and we can show success, man, that gets more people's attention than anything else by far.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll circle back with you because we do have some prospects there, and I think that would be helpful. If
you have a end customer, it's probably the most, useful thing to help out. The other thing I was going to add is that we have a new CEO. I don't know if you heard, Pat Gelsinger, right? Very software centric. We spent an hour with him just briefing him on what we're doing on vRAN and so on. And the question kept coming back was, what's the application? What's the service? Because when he was in Intel, he was silicon. Then he spent 9 years in VMware. Now he's software. so that in a way helps me, right? I don't have to just go talk about, here's my 10 nanometer, 7. No, like he's asking about, because VMware becomes just in a different dimension. I'm very hopeful and that we'll get even more attention.
Great, thank you. We'll reach back out to Sean because it's always a challenge because it seems like we're arm's length from Intel working through the ODM equipment supplier that's providing the infrastructure to the service provider. So it's 2 steps removed. But thank you.
This is a shortcut. The 5G OI is definitely a shortcut. Allow you to get to many, not just Intel. Like you have a shortcut now to John Saul, for example.
You mean tomorrow?
You mean tomorrow?
Yeah.
Tell him I'm just way prettier than him. I'm way more charming than him.
I'll let Lee tell him that. Yeah. All right.
John's not used to working no time together, so I try to needle him every chance I get.
Yeah. Katia, you had a question from A5G Networks?
Yeah. Thanks,
Sure.
Jim. Thanks, Caroline. It was a great session, and thanks for sharing your views on the overall ecosystem. And I totally agree. That's a very useful step from the startup ecosystem point of view, getting connected with the Intel's view on the overall ecosystem, not just from the silicon point of view. So with that, I have a question on what's your view. So I totally agree, of course, with the Open RAN, hardware, software disaggregation. But now with A5G, we have been thinking more on the network disaggregation, public-private clouds, and some of the peer-to-peer applications, and how the world will change with blockchain and more disaggregated components coming into the network. So is there any plan to add those specific things or use cases in the ecosystem?
I would love to. In fact, I think when you and I before this cohort, when we talked about this, definite interest on that, and I think we should have a follow up with bring Diane into the conversation, who you already know. So let's talk more about it. I think what you're describing is probably the logical next step for that, because I do see there is because now that you're serving the private network, there is another dimension that will add on to the requirements, right? What we typically call the product requirements. Not to discount it, what T-Mobile is doing today is absolutely necessary. You got to get the 5G connectivity out. And then what's the next refinement? I'm actually ask John tomorrow the same question too, see what he says. I will imagine that he will have the same feedback. Is you build this ever-present 5G, in leveraging the public spectrum, all the C-band that people spend so much money on. Then you add on top of layer that you customize certain pieces to serve the private industry. So I agree. I think which is the question of how we're going to implement that in a way that does not totally disrupt the underlying public network. So why don't we follow up? Yeah, you have my email, so.
Thank you.
Caroline, I have an assertion that I'd love to get your perspective on. Private enterprise networking, we're still very much in the early phases of that. There's 2 ways that I've observed folks looking at private LTE today or private 5G in the future. The first is just purely connectivity, right? And so, hey, I need to go outfit a stadium or a manufacturing facility or whatever for connectivity. And then there's the cloud vendor view of this, as this is a hybrid cloud with connectivity. I think you did a good job of explaining how Intel views on that. But if I can put words in your mouth for a moment, I think how you see private 5G networking is really the combination of application capabilities in a hybrid environment with the connectivity components to that. Is that correct?
Totally. In fact, I don't know how many of you even noticed that we had announced a partnership with Google Cloud 2 weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago. They actually, it started with Edge, and they actually wanted to work with us. And the announcement came out, says that we do joint lab. They wanted to optimize FlexRAN on Anthos. Why would Google do that, right? My assertion, and also why does Intel do that? In fact, I had to justify this inside Intel. Like, what? Why are you working? And I had to go tell to all the operators, explain to them why we're working with Google. It's because exactly what you said is that when enterprises takes 5G, it's still a SIM card. Like, we buy a whole package from AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile for our employees. It's still connectivity. The next phase has to be application, and it has to be hybrid cloud. So on-prem doesn't mean that you completely cut off. I think the cloud vendors, the cloud providers, all think that they have a legitimate place in this. Just you have on-prem cloud, and the on-prem cloud has somehow get back to the public cloud. Just think about what the AI, what the learning is going to happen, what the training is going to happen. Those two really have to work together, and it really comes into play. Like if you think about, we have a partnership with VMware as well. What's VMware's assertion? It's also hybrid cloud assertion. They partner with every cloud vendors out there, right? So my new CEO would absolutely think that same way, that 5G is really cement the relationship between private and the hybrid cloud concept, cemented it by aligning what we're doing. What I'm like to see is aligning a completely cloud economics for the connectivity piece, as well to be the underlying engine to accelerate a hybrid cloud environment, to allow the enterprises to fully utilizing the IT, the OT with the actual connectivity itself. Hopefully, I'm not being over complex describing this. This is how we talk internally. This is how I present to my boss and present to his boss, who runs the entire data platform group. And I actually said that to Pat in our first hour meeting that we had with him, to brief him on why we investing this way in vRAN, because why does Intel doing all this work? Why don't we just turn on another silicon and say, hey, be done with it, right? So there's a reason. The reason is that the paradigm is shifting. It's a compute paradigm now. So
yeah, it's software. You're right. It's absolutely software.
Software-driven world. Yeah. So.
Now, when I looked into this opportunity early on in 2018, there were a few industries that were really leading the charge out of necessity, and those industries included mining, energy sector generally, like oil and gas. What industries are you seeing leading really in this 5G, private 5G, and software sort of bent? What industries are you seeing that are really making some impacts and investments in this direction?
I'm just looking at my own investment going. Right now, the largest of my budget going to industrial. We have an industrial test bed in Arizona. We're going to set up one as well in Oregon. That's probably where the most money investment went in. Why is that? I mean, you can sit back logistically, you can do all the numbers you want, you can pay a lot of money to analysts, but at the end was the customer stepping up asking for it. We have like, if you look, we engage with at least two, maybe three now, major European manufacturers wanting this. They're willing to invest in their dollars and resources with us to do the test bed. We have actually commercial rollout in China. China's a little bit ahead. I know we don't want to think about that. U.S. is first, but China is actually first. We have two deployment in China, very, very telling. One is both of them are actually in the same city in Guangzhou area where a lot of manufacturing are. both. One is a refrigerator manufacturer. One is a car manufacturer. It's a JV between a U.S. based and a Chinese based company. One of them took a entirely private network, but there's no special spectrum for in China, right? Because that's no regulatory. So it is a public spectrum, but they basically China Unicom just gave that spectrum in that location to that factory. So it's a complete on-prem private cut off from everybody else, but Tencent's involved. The cloud is involved. Okay, so it runs at the factory. You know, right now connectivity, I think they have some defects and they have some monitoring the productivity and so on and so forth. But there'll be more editing, AI and all that stuff. The cloud's there. The second case is actually a slice. It's actually an outside-in view. It's a public network, and then they gave a slice to that factory. Again, guess who showed up? The cloud is there. Yeah. One of them is there. I forgot which one, but one of them is there. Consistently, you see that over and over. Like, is the outside-in view gonna win or on-prem gonna win? I think that really depends on how confident the factory owners. How do they feel about data integrity, data sovereign, all that? I think it's their choice. But the recipe, it's at some level is the same, right? Yeah. You have a cloud, you have an operator, you have a spectrum of some kind, private spectrum, public spectrum, and then you have the ODM and tons of software investment, tons of software investment. If you measure the ODM revenue versus the software, that investment, it can't even, and automation, like that factory manager does not want to go to treat this and that. Like, no, you better just gonna, I bought this from like the way that they were, I remember that we were just having this, virtual call with them. They were like, yeah, I'm buying this from, in their world, it's Alibaba. I'm buying this from Alibaba today like that. Why did you need to give it to me? I'm not gonna go send an engineer to go monitor tune the antenna. They don't do any of that stuff. They just, you better be giving it to them just like as a service model. Huh. Yeah, that's another topic. Is as a service. That's a hot topic. Everybody's talking about as a service. Right. People talk about networks as a service, and now people talk about secure as a service, whatever as a service. Everything's as a service. Because they're so trained by the cloud to think of it as service. Why should I pay for the software? I don't know. A year from now, I need the same equipment. So, right. Well, that's a whole other. We have to think differently too. Like you and I talked about this. We have to think differently. Yeah. Well, yeah. We have a slide that's called "Think Differently." Kevin had a question, but I want to come back to you to ask a question around the relationship between Tencent, Alibaba on the cloud side to a China Unicom, China Mobile, and what that relationship is like, given those two examples, and how different that is in other parts of the world. But before we go there, I was going to turn it over to Kevin to ask his question.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Caroline, you talked a great deal about the technical evolution, and I agree with what you said, is when you look at O-RAN, there's a workflow that's coming into the operators, not just backhaul network management. There's literally a business process workflow that's going to evolve a great deal of their mindset and talent. And the reason why is because that compute is coming down to the connectivity layer. And so when you look at that, coming from my background at Cisco, and Alan Boone's on here as well, as when we remonetized their network strategy, they moved away from just charging for hardware to consuming innovation. And so when you look at the carriers, 5G is not just compute coming down to the down to the connectivity layer. It's a different business model. And I think that you just were implying the implications of public cloud, but I think you're going to see the carriers give away SIMs and charge for connectivity. Their hand is going to be forced to think about just don't charge for connectivity. How do they monetize their networks in a very different way? Yeah. And so when you set aside O-RAN, I look at it technically, but I think I come more from a business implication perspective. And I would like just your initial thoughts on how do you see Hans and others digesting the evolution that's taken place in their business to think about the implications of 5G to how they monetize their business and not become disenfranchised with their customer base? Because it is a business shift.
Yeah, like interesting you brought that up. I think like if I just look at what GSMA is doing, I deal with them in a peripheral case by participating in some of the conversation. I sit on the board of TIP. Right, TIP is a very good example. It was founded by Facebook. You talk about social engines, how they monetize our digital footprint. It's a granddaddy of that. But with me on the board, besides myself and Dell, is a bunch of European operators. They absolutely think of it as, how do I get away from charging that just a SIM card? Because that money is capped. Like, we don't pay more just because you gave me 5G. I think the thinking has started. GSMA has talked about a business transformation for the telco. Certainly at TIP, we just announced that we're going to start a private 5G private network working group. And I'm pushing as one of the sponsors that don't think of it just as technology, because technology can be solved. Really think about it as a business problem. How do you charge for that? Do you still just send them a SIM card and charge by time and bytes, or do you then charge for business results? If I may say it like that, right? How do I charge for? Do I get a business? I get paid by business results. So I'm pushing for that. That hopefully the next board meeting will agree. Because if it's just solving technical issues, I don't think that warrants a working group. Because that should be done by somebody else. So I think you're onto something. I'm thinking around the same way. Make sure you ask John that question tomorrow, though. Make sure he answers that. Don't let him get away without answering. If anybody testing now, say, hey, I set you up, buddy.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing. It's I think the deployment of 5G will operate in parallel to the evolution of the business model, because this is not, too many times people look at it as just a technical evolution, and this is going to be an outcomes business-based proposition. And that is the shift.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. You actually said it better than I did. You say outcome based. Yeah. Well, I would say business solution based. It's outcome based. How do you solve an issue? You get paid for it.
The software layer coming down to the network layer will be measured on the basis of outcomes at an individual customer level, and that's what our contribution has got to maintain line of sight to.
Yes, absolutely. If I had yesterday I had a one-on-one with the head of our telco sales, and I've been telling him, I said that right now we measure our the way that we go and sell 5G is he's asking me how do we go sell private 5G, right? Because I said I think we need to give a different tool to our sales team, a sales enabling. We typically go in Intel way, say, I have this new Xeon coming out. I have this 4-core, 6-core, 8-core, 10-core. Which one do you want? This is the price. This is the thermal. I think we need to change that. Like, imagine go to the head of Johnson & Johnson, go, hey, what kind of CPU do you want? Like, what's he gonna think about you? Rather, develop a sales enabling tool that is this solving a pharmaceutical manufacturing problem. I'm sure that the Johnson & Johnson guy is going crazy. How do I turn out 100 million more vaccine? So what if we solve that? Supply chain monitoring, defect monitoring, things like that, logistics. What if we change the sales enablement? He's like, oh, good Lord, how much is it going to cost me to turn out that tool? I'm like, well, we'll figure that out later. But the mindset have to change.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Caroline, this is Kurt. One of the things we used to talk about in that evolution to the cloud on the hyperscaler side was you're fundamentally moving from a CapEx-driven IT world to an OpEx-driven IT world, right? And just understanding that at the very fundamental level and its impacts across every function in an enterprise, right, really gets you to understand how much of a transformation this is, right? So this is about finance as much as it is the business function, and then development and IT and ops all working together to serve both of those folks or those functions. So it's seamless across all those. And this is why digital transformation is still, quite honestly, at its very, very beginning.
Very early, very
right.
early.
And so we've been talking about it for 6 or 7 years, but the reality of it is because it's such a fundamental shift that and across every function inside of an enterprise that it is still very much at its early stages, right? So the opportunities are huge here.
Yeah, if we can figure out how to do this, somebody in the way back, when this all this Uber thing comes out, and it's like people don't want to own things. I had a hard time even convince my neighbors. Told me that his kids don't even want to have a driver license because they don't see the need to own a car. So it's kind of there is a shift. Even for a company like Intel, there's so many people talk about silicon as a service. Like that's just unheard of, even 5 years ago. Let alone I've been here 10 years. Like nobody talk about like when you talk about silicon as a service, sell that damn silicon. But no, people are talking about not a CapEx driven model, but a OpEx driven, a subscription based model. So yeah, Kurt, I think that how to solve that, it's a mindset change. CFO has to be able to count money differently.
Yeah, we look at it as just opportunity, right? And it's just there's so much opportunity for change in this transformation. It just creates opportunity for so many different layers. And so, that's the only way to look at it, I think, with the glass half full is that all this change, and while it's hard, is just opportunity.
Yeah.
Hey,
it's still very early. Right?
Kurt, this is Kevin. May I add something on top of what you and Caroline were just saying?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So when I initiated a lot of the monetization change at Cisco, what I was fascinated by, something that you were just talking about, is we got stuck coming from a hardware discussion. We got stuck into subscription versus perpetual and the value.
Yep.
And what I had to constantly reinforce to our board was choice is the value. And so they would say, what do you mean by choice? And I was like, there is no 5-year horizon anymore. Yeah. What people have to understand is a choice by how they leverage their OpEx and CapEx, and the way in which we present innovation to them is a consumption. Meaning, if you present a runway of what they're currently leveraging and your innovation, they will consume it in the manner in which it is most advantageous for them to be a good partner of yours. So when I listened to Caroline and her chart looking at 21, 22, 23, it was casting a roadmap for people to decide how best to use their OpEx and CapEx collectively to actually evolve their business model. Yep. And so something you and I have talked about, and she had inherently in her slide, is what is the value of what you currently have and how do you use it and consume it to actually achieve your future stated goals. So OpEx and CapEx is going to be a constant choice by how you actually use it on a year-by-year basis to actually evolve all these business models.
That's right. Yeah. And IT has been such a CapEx-driven world for so long, is that they're in the center of this storm of change, right? And so Absolutely. It's a very different model. And look, I know you saw this at Cisco. We saw it at Microsoft. Caroline talked about the change here. This is as much internal change you have to go through to get people to understand. You have to sell differently, right? Absolutely. And you have to target your solutions at a different place in the business than you used to before, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Caroline, you said it. It's the CFO and the COO become the instruments of change on consuming OpEx and CapEx collectively across how a business is going to evolve. And that is, to your point, Kurt, IT, and all of us have an IT background. I have to realize our audience is elevated and changed.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story, Kevin. You started this. I serve on a board of a company that makes battery. Think about how that online business is. And I just created a shitstorm last time. I said, we should think about battery as a service. I mean, my God, the CEO almost fell off the chair. But in a world where you do fast charging, EVs, think about all the electronic vehicle gonna flood the market, like, what is it, in 5 years? I think it's half of us might be driving EV now. The charging, it's going to be a new business that we need to think into. Anyway, but I'm just telling you that this whole subscription as a service, don't just sell a battery, but think about how do that serve. It's everywhere. It's not just in telco. It's not just in high tech. It's fun to be on the board and stir up, get the CFO, CEO nervous. But it's everywhere. We probably at the forefront of this, and what you're doing can change.